I want to get as quickly as possible to our presentations today. We have three cheers for Padma, who is a PhD candidate in both architecture and South and Southeast Asian studies, and Lawrence Yang, who is from East Asian languages and cultures, and they are working together on a publication called Urban Pilgrimage. And Karin Shankar is in performance studies, and Kirsten Larson is here from both city planning and architecture. So I'd like to introduce what they all are working on in the context of our Global Urban Humanities Initiative. Mostly what we're doing in this initiative is creating new courses. We're focused kind of on pedagogy, what happens when you bring together faculty to teach courses from very different departments. But we also wanted to figure out, well, what does this mean in terms of research? You know, once students learn some of these interdisciplinary skills, what kind of products, you know, what kind of conclusions can we reach from bringing together these different methods and different epistemological approaches? So last year we put out a call for proposals for publications, which were to be edited by students, student teams, and each team had to have somebody from the Arts and Humanities Division and then somebody from CED. And it could be on any theme, any urban theme that the teams wanted to propose. And we got just a fantastic slate of proposals. We had planned to support one publication, and we ended up supporting two, which are both fantastic, but actually the ideas that were generated by all the groups were really exciting. So I think what I'll do is, our word of the day, I'm going to be very brief today. I'm not going to do a presentation because I just want to save time. So I'm just going to verbally ask you to keep up. There are two words of the day since we have two groups today. And the two words are motion and juxtaposition. And both of those words, as they apply to cities, have to do with both space and time. And I think if we keep those concepts in mind and try and link them back to sensing and to how motion and juxtaposition affect legibility of cities, how they affect the image of cities that we hold in our minds and that we create on paper or on the web, I think that there will be a kind of through line among these keywords and going back to the first keyword, plan. So how, in a plan, do you represent motion, and what does juxtaposition mean both in space and time? So that's just to keep in the back of your minds as you listen to our presentations, and I think Padma's going to start us off.
Yes.
Hi. It's really a pleasure to be here, and I want to say thank you for the opportunity to speak and share this project as it's ongoing, and also for the opportunity to put these journals together. I think one thing to stress is that they're not projects that are finished, but underway. And so we have no conclusions yet, but we're moving towards that. So we're going to share, as it were, work in progress. So our theme is urban pilgrimage. And we just got submissions last week on it. So we put out a call on urban pilgrimage, and we'll talk about our entrance into that. But we just got submissions last week, and I think what we're excited about is the diversity of them, from English to literature to architecture to urban planning to theologists, archaeologists, and they've all come in. And I think what's been exciting to notice for each one is how they take pilgrimage and then look at it within their realm of discourse and their own interest, whether it's pilgrimage itself or protest or art, and then juxtapose it to the call. So how does urban pilgrimage change when you make it rural? How does pilgrimage change when you make it contemporary? How does it change when you put it in a temporary city? So as a way to start, I thought I think we're all going to just go through our own entrance into the project. So for me, it starts in India, and it starts with Buddhism. So it started by noticing that there's these new Buddhist sites for Dalit Buddhists and Bectarian Buddhists. And You can see the white dots are the kind of old traditional circuit of Buddhist pilgrimage sites in India, and they're mostly rural now. They're kind of forgotten or ruined. They're archaeological sites. And then there's this constellation of new Buddhist sites, which are both new and new Buddhist. And I found what's interesting is that those new sites are all in cities. So these new Dalits are building their new pilgrimage zones in cities. Now that's not to say the old pilgrimage sites weren't in cities, but they're no longer in cities. And I think noticing how these circuits change and where they develop starts to make a link between pilgrimage and value and where people are going and spending time. So cities are important centers, and that's how pilgrimage ends up being centered there. The other part of that is that these processes of pilgrimage start to write themselves into art, into literature, into narratives, both as ways to map out landscapes, but also to inscribe the landscape itself. So here we see a map where you see the pilgrimage route and you see people on it, but it also talks about a cosmology or a worldview that makes sense of that movement. And then this is a more contemporary, this is a more current, this is a project that's happening at the GSD in Harvard called Mapping the Kumbh Mela. And it's this, every year there's a pilgrimage of, they say, over 100 million people to this specific spot. And what they're interested in is the temporary urbanism that comes up around it. So 100 million people, how do you, I mean, it's like Burning Man on a whole new scale. So this is what they're mapping, and that's one of the contributions. We'll be talking about that project as well. So as a way to transition into Lawrence's talk, I want to just bring up one contribution about, it's from Lynn Hejinian, who is an English professor here at Berkeley. And she wrote about her experience of protest. And she's been protesting since the 60s, and her experience of walking down Telegraph routinely over the past 40 years, and how that became a sort of pilgrimage to her. And again, she juxtaposed the idea of pilgrimage and protest, trying to find the difference between them. And I should say one of the things that's interesting about pilgrimage, and particularly as I know it in India, is that pilgrimage sites are these kind of meeting points between two conditions. We might say between the mundane or the super mundane, the past, the present. And the act of pilgrimaging to them, or journeying to them, changes the person, it changes the experience, it changes you forever, and it changes your view. So Lynn took that up, writing, a pilgrimage is never properly perpetual. It has a beginning, a middle, and an end, however one narratives it. But whatever memories it carries, and whatever it actualizes as its goal are ongoing. The protest march intensifies the potential inherent to pilgrimage. It politicizes the space it transits, demanding that creation of the as-yet unrealized future becomes the prospect of the present. No pilgrimage can end in justice, of course. Indeed, a pilgrimage doesn't aspire to do so. That remains the proper goal, ostensible, though not yet fulfilled, of a protest march. So with that, I'll hand it over to Lawrence.
Yeah, so I guess following Padma's main topic of urban pilgrimage, I think my personal entry into this theme is relatively, it took a while for me to figure out what this term actually means, because I encountered this theme when Padma invited me to the tutorial team, and the first time I heard about the term, for me it's like an oxymoron. It's already self-contradictory. Urban, for me the connotation is physical, the materiality, the environment. But pilgrimage sells something more like collective consciousness. It's like something virtual, I would say. So in the very beginning, there's a virtual and actual plane up there. Then later on, for the first time, I was thinking, is this thing like speaking to my own research interest in, I studied modern Chinese literatures, Taiwanese literatures, and in terms of space. So my original focus was on narratives, on time, on temporality actually, on how narrative proceed and give meaning, give memory, give collective consciousness to a place. So later on, I figured out that urban pilgrimage theme actually speaks to many things that I have been already looking at. For one of the example, which is more recent one, is the Hong Kong protest. For some of you who have been paying attention to modern East Asian or current situation, there's been a protest culture arising, well, particularly this year in Taiwan, in Hong Kong now. And so what I've been observing, I'm interested in how different people assemble through different modes of assemblage. For example, I have been noticing Taiwan and in Hong Kong students protest through a kind of different engagement with urban space. for example, cell phone. When infrastructure fails, kind of quoting Grant. Well, this recent scholarly engagement with infrastructure, the students in Hong Kong Taipei kind of challenged this deterministic dimension of infrastructure by physically forming different kinds of assemblage. For example, cell phone. When the government cut off Wi-Fi nodal point, cut off mobile signals, they kind of turned to another app called FireChat. So they require physical body to get together and to form a temporary network. In that sense, in other words, they are using their own bodies to create a kind of physical infrastructure, which is like really opposite to what our previous understanding of what infrastructure function, like water, air conditioning, Wi-Fi, all these things. So I guess so that's in Taipei. So that's all in this year, March and now. So this entry into different kinds of assemblage kind of bring me to, or bring my thinking, editorial thinking, into the role of media plays in functioning or facilitating the flow of human beings, like physically pulling human beings to a certain designated site with particular kind of meaning or hermeneutic meaning. It can be sacred, it can be banal, but somehow either way, it's facilitated by certain kind of mediation. So I come across this author called Brian Larson in his teaching anthropology in Columbia, and which for this special issue I'm also arranging an interview with. We're scheduling an interview probably in the coming 2 weeks with Professor Brian Larson. So his anthropological field is in Nigeria. Nigeria actually is Nollywood, right, I think. They call it Nollywood. So his work is basically study how media technology, like all cassette, VHS, piracy, videotapes, function under a really strict censorship, and how media technology kind of generated a different sense of alternative public or counter-public to it. So here, attention to media specificity, which is something we share from literary studies, narrative studies, and to studies of public sphere and how people assemble by way of different infrastructure and media. So that's like a utopian plan for the area when they were thinking about there's a bullet train under the tunnel. Yeah. So another focus is to plan on urban pilgrimage is that a lot of time pilgrimage focus on the experience of the singularity. That's irreproducible. It's only we experience that. We be there. The point is to be there to tell people story. Oh, I have been to Paris. I have been to the center of the world, and to narrate that story to other people. So this kind of a center-peripheral paradigm in our previous understanding of pilgrimage. But somehow this thing in China, replica architecture, that's blooming everywhere in these middle-scale cities in China, that totally, they build a town, totally copy upon iconic European cities. And they build a town that look almost exactly like Paris with the icon. So, by the way, one of our anniversary board, our advisors, Winnie Wong in Rhetoric, she just published this book, Van Gogh on Demand. So it also plays upon this idea of replica, the copy and the original. So in terms of different kinds of urbanism, this kind of replica architecture and replicated communities rising in China also kind of challenge the kind of center-peripheral imagination when we think about pilgrimage as a word, as something movement from the periphery to the center. So, okay. So I guess that's different entries that we come to think about to play upon the sacred and the profane, the banal and the singular. Yeah.
So just because we have a form and we're going to plug it. So Room 1000 is the journal that is working with this initiative to publish this issue. And I think as an embodiment of kind of what we're hoping to do is, again, bring different voices together and bring humanities and college environmental design students together. And towards that end, the journal is founded around a review board and editorial panel that's made up of people from literature, architecture, rhetoric, and different disciplines. And I think what we've been excited to hear from people submitting is that they're interested to hear how somebody else will respond to their piece. So they don't want somebody in rhetoric, if they're from rhetoric, they don't want somebody in rhetoric reviewing their paper. They want somebody from architecture, who they don't get to hear from very often. And so those are the kind of juxtapositions we're doing both in editorial but also in content to say, is there something new about pilgrimage? Maybe not, but we'll find out by juxtaposing the kind of new and old together. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Karin, Shankar, and I am a PhD candidate in performance studies.
And my name is Kirsten, Larson. I'm a Master's of Architecture and City Planning student.
And thank you all for being here, and thank you for that wonderful presentation. And we're so excited to be sharing notes with the two of you as we get deeper and deeper into our edited volumes. So we just wanted to introduce a little bit about where we are in our thinking around the theme of participatory urbanisms. Our project is actually twofold. We have a fieldwork component that we just finished over the summer, and we have our edited volume of essays. So our main question going into this project was to ask how the mode of participation is enacted in the realms of urban art and urban politics. So there's been a participatory turn in performance studies and in urban studies in recent years. And in the realm of performance and art, a participatory piece is one in which the relationship, or the traditional relationship between artist, audience, and art object is subverted or questioned. And so the artist is no longer the sole creator, the audience is no longer the passive recipient, and the art object isn't really an object, but a process or an event. And so this raises all sorts of questions about aesthetic value of the project, who participates, what heteronymous or autonomous art production means, who the artist is. It really destabilizes a lot of categories that we have taken for granted in the realm of the arts. And in the realm of urban governance, participatory projects are those in which the beneficiaries of certain urban governance initiatives have a say in what that initiative will look like. And again, the questions that this raised are around the co-optation of the participatory process, questions of success, or how do you measure success? Is it enough to say that the community came together to create this project even though the project didn't succeed? And other questions around value of an initiative, and also sustainability of participatory initiatives.
So for the research component of the project, I spent the summer in Sao Paulo, and Karin spent the summer in New Delhi. And we identified 10 groups who self-identified as participatory and spent a lot of time with each group and recorded conversations about the history of the group, about themes of participation, about themes of politics, of collective action. And the groups in each city don't mirror each other, but there's a wide range of discipline, there's a wide range of size of the groups, location in the city.
Yeah, and so you can see the spread of groups. So from New Delhi, for instance, we have Janan, which is the oldest street theatre organization in Delhi. There's Sarai, which set up these media labs in working class neighborhoods in Delhi to bring youth together to talk about ways of generating knowledge about their neighborhood. There was Chintan, which is a waste workers collective, and we spent considerable time with each of these organizations just asking them about what they thought participation meant, what they thought urban citizenship meant, how they thought that they were changing the city spaces in which they found themselves every day, and how these spaces were changing them, and what they thought taking part in the city meant, really. And so we came up with a really wide set of responses to our questions about urban citizenship and participation.
And one interesting thing that we're still exploring, we're receiving the transcriptions of the interviews. Now, one of the interesting things from the interviews that I did in Sao Paulo is the groups represent a range of what we consider very traditional bottom-up, so groups that grew out of community initiatives, to groups that were initiatives of a practitioner going into a community or going into a neighborhood and starting a project and collaborating with community members. So there's, kind of two sides of the same coin represented in the different groups also.
Okay.
So the product of the research, both the edited collection of academic essays and the transcripts edited transcripts from the recorded conversations, will be a website which will be launched in May. And the edited transcripts will be translated into English and Portuguese and Hindi. So that's one of the kind of next phases. And the formal and conceptual framework for the website is a diptych, which in art is used to extend the canvas and draw parallels between two parties. So you'll always be looking at simultaneously one project from Sao Paulo with the interview from Sao Paulo and one project from New Delhi. So you'll be able to juxtapose. That's probably why Susan had that word, hopefully. If you want to look at the waste pickers collected from New Delhi against every project from Sao Paulo and draw parallels between those two, and we're hoping that this will reveal new disjunctions in how people read participation, how they enact participation, and how different groups from sites engage participation. One thing I found when I was visiting groups in Sao Paulo is that we're really excited to read the interviews from New Delhi. They were really excited to see how projects in a city that has very similar urban conditions and has a lot of the same struggles, how participation is enacted in a different place.
So here's just a little taste of some of the information our conversations brought us. When I asked Chintan, which is the Informal Waste Workers Collective, what they thought urban citizenship was, a representative from the organization gave me this answer, so I'll just read it out. Urban citizenship is when everybody has a basic standard of living and can access the city, whether it's the park, the metro, all of that. But more importantly, we think urban citizenship is about how and where you are able to contribute to the city, and does the city administration facilitate that contribution or allow you to contribute? So if you're an informal waste worker, why aren't you given some space in the city to sort out your waste? So it goes far, far beyond legal discourse in terms of rights and entitlements, but really the right to work and have your work recognized and to have some space for the work that you contribute. And Cyber Mahalla, which is a media lab in working class neighborhoods, there's 5 of them in New Delhi. So this was the answer I got to what do you think urban citizenship is. Urban citizenship, it's a philosophical question. It definitely has to do with rights and entitlements, and a lot of people in our neighborhood don't have access to the things they should have, electricity, water. But on the other hand, it is also about belonging. So we might not have rights or material things, but we feel like we're a part of the city. This is more interesting for us because no one else can tell me whether I should be here or not. And I will use the means and techniques that are available to me to make sure that I can survive here. I know I belong to Delhi. So these are the things that we're dealing with: questions of citizenship and belonging, questions of the right to work, the space to work, in addition to more conventional definitions of citizenship. So yes, we're in the process of going through all our transcriptions and culling all this really wonderful information. And Kirsten and I will be co-writing an article together about the many ways in which we saw participation being defined and enacted across these 2 megapolises. So we're very excited about that question.
So here's also just a taste from 2 of the interviews in Sao Paulo. So of course the question of politics and enacting the political as a part of these projects was really prevalent. So these are just quotes, not necessarily from a direct question, but parts that came up in interviews. So one was with the Street Theater Collective. It's based on works of Brazilian literature and poetry that are often not read outside of an academic setting. It was maybe my favorite interview. I shouldn't have a favorite, but it was really great. So we don't necessarily bring poems and short stories that have a political theme to the street, but if there is a story that tells about a public official who wanted to be a magician and did not become one, if this is not political, what is? This is where the political lies. So this group talked a lot about how they don't have an overt political agenda, but in not having an overt political agenda, they have a very strong political agenda. They don't accept money that's not public money. They refuse to become a non-governmental organization. They only locate where they have their rehearsals in a location that's close to public transport. So they have a lot of, political ideals embedded within the organization, but they don't have an overt kind of political agenda. And the second quote is from an alternative reporting online journal that reports about displacement, particularly in the center of the city, speculation, funding of government campaigns, and who's behind that, how it changes the center of the city. And so this is the quote from them. And it was quite interesting to see how the question of systemization of information and production of journalistic information, the same, play an important role if you take a side. In general, inciting a discussion about whether or not journalism should take a position, or if the essence of journalism is to be impartial and all that. At Architecture, we do not draw such a clear line between journalism and activism. So they have a very clear kind of manifesto about what side they're on, that they're on the side of the oppressed, and they say it in a very direct way, and trying to show through articles, through documentary videos, collaborating with groups that are being displaced, particularly in the center of the city, and sort of telling their story.
And so for the second part of our project, it was a call for proposals that we sent out on participatory urbanisms, and we were just so pleased with the overwhelming response that we received. We received over 70 proposals, and the abstracts, we've sort of grouped them under these tentative headings. So there's a wide spread of the kind of work that we received from scholars, but also artists and activists, and also a very broad geographic spread, so we're very, very excited about that.
A really huge range of projects, range of talking about participation, problematizing participation, groups that have been practicing for a really long time, young academics. So it was exciting and overwhelming to read through all the submissions, and then we have it narrowed down to 30 that we're working with categories to, again, pair different disciplines in a way that kind of makes sense. Yeah, I think that's. So we've received all the abstracts, the full submissions will come in December, and then there'll be a peer review process, and the articles will be on the website along with the transcriptions in May.
Thank you.
Well, I'm so excited to see the work you all have been doing. It's just gotten so much done since last spring. It's really thrilling. I know folks will have a lot of questions about the content, I mean, what you all are talking about, but I want to open up with just a little question about form, because what we've been talking about in this book so far is a lot about representation of the city, 2 dimensions, maps, murals, and in more than those dimensions, we start getting into thinking about bodies and space. But you all are representing cities through scholarship, and you are arranging scholarship about cities in a certain way. And I wonder if you could, each team could talk just a little bit about the format that you chose, which is going to be both online and how does that?
I think for us, we did talk about the diptych as kind of a conceptual and formal scaffolding for the interviews, but one thing that was really important to us is, if you think about legibility as how you represent things, is having the interviews in the 3 different languages. So there's, most of the people that I recorded conversations with in Sao Paulo don't speak English. So if the interviews were just translated, if both sides of the interviews were just translated into English, kind of the whole Sao Paulo audience would fall out. So I think that was, in terms of legibility, that was a really important part of constructing the diptych.
Another thing, so when we started talking about this project, we also we refer to Hal Foster's questionnaire of the contemporary, and at the time when he presented this idea of handing art curators and artists this questionnaire of the contemporary to really ask what contemporary meant to various contemporary art curators and practitioners, because it was a word that was being thrown around and also a word that was a catch-all. And we found the same with the term participation, that it was being used sort of loosely, and it was used to get funding by lots of NGOs because it was like a catchphrase that was in vogue. And so we wanted to set out or send out a sort of this questionnaire on what participation actually meant and actually looked like, and then to be able to share the information from two cities and have practitioners and artists and activists in these two spaces be able to see what the other things participation is, also within their own city, various organizations, and across these two cities. So that's why the diptych as a form visually helps us draw these lines of flight between diverse sites. And the visitor to the website can choose which questions and which answers they want to read at the same time to layer this idea of participation, layer this idea of urban citizenship. So having that kind of the raw transcripts online was really important to us. We wanted them to be performative objects in their own right, such that the viewer could use them as they chose, and the practitioners in each city could use them as they saw fit and useful.
So our format's a little bit more traditional, so I brought it. So this is Room 1000, it's the first issue. This will actually be the third issue of that journal. And so within that, we have been trying to be creative and novel in how we disseminate information, mostly because it's free. So there's the California Digital Archives, which is through the California Digital Library, where actually you can get all the material from Room 1000 free and permanently archived there. So all this content will go that way. So in that sense, it's a bit more traditional journal articles where they're presented. And I guess we've been talking more and more that there's an active curation in that. So even though we're calling for submissions, we're constantly trying to support it with interviews or discussions or art projects that we see or come into contact with, and to ask them to comment and add to. So I think formally I think it's quite a nice format. But and the website's nice, I think, but there's also the kind of informal form of the project, which is all the students who get to work on it. So I think this kind of thing is an important pedagogical form for the school. And I think one of the things I'm most proud about for the journal is people who perhaps never published before or never would publish, because we have a bit more of a need for content. We can put more time and investment in people writing essays and help them to learn that process. So I think that's also part of the process for us. It's more on campus than off, but I think that's part of it.
Yeah, also when we're deciding, well, what kind of try to position where this journal should be, we're thinking about different genres, is because it is something between academic, like a purely academic journal, and also like magazine, like a stylistic architectural magazine. But so we kind of decide to situate that special cover paper somewhere in between. So that's why we put on a call for different kind of genre, like photo essays, short thought pieces, which is like really short. But if that short thought piece can kind of provide an alternative view or a different, fresh perspective to the theme, that we would still take it. And well, so this kind of breaking away from the limits of length and particular requirement for a academic journal. So that's probably how we situate that too.
Yeah, that's another thing we've also done. Our submissions are all multi-genre, so we have photo essays, interviews, and scholarly pieces, artworks, like pictures of art, participatory art pieces, projects that are in process. So it's really, really exciting to see these various forms of addressing the question.
How did you reach that broad audience in terms of getting the call out to different people outside the discipline?
Susan was a big help.
Yeah.
She sent it to the whole Global Urban Humanities listserv. But we also, I mean, it was a little bit of networking, people you know that are graduate students at other schools, and then just, going to schools and organizations' websites that you think would have work that would be related, and emailing professors, emailing academic advisors. So it was just a lot of email blasting and networking with people that you know.
And also, I mean, I sent it to the Performance Studies International listservs, but I think international professional listservs are really wonderful. We had like, the geographic one was pretty stunning.
Yeah, it's really, much more than we had anticipated, so it's really exciting.
Yeah. And then the practitioners in the cities, we also sent the call to them and they disseminated it as well.
Also Jeanette, she's in the corner. She's one of our essays, academic essays.
I was wondering what the most surprising similarities and or differences between Sao Paulo and New Delhi were, and also if you noticed any sort of really surprising meanings of participation out of the submissions that you got, or out of the activists and artists that you talked to.
So for the first part, we've just received the transcription, so we're just in the process of sharing them. So we haven't actually gotten to that really exciting question about what were the differences and similarities. And the most surprising findings,
Participation.
there were several. Should I go
Yeah,
first?
yeah.
So well, one of the questions I asked was like, who are your partners in this? And everybody had this very contested relationship with the government. Some people were like, you know, the government isn't very supportive until we show them, like, look, this is the massive support for this project, and then they're on board. And this idea that you have to get the government on board if you want anything to happen, otherwise, in this like a direct quote, otherwise we'll only be doing guerrilla activity, like 3 minutes here, 1 hour there. But the government was seen as this difficult partner that you have to work with in order to make anything sustainable. They all wanted to get out of their funding cycle, so a lot of them appealed to various sorts of funders to fund their work, government agencies, but also arts foundations. And they said that asking for funds every 3 years has just become a nightmare, and it's what the head of the organization spends all their time on. So they're trying to find ways to make themselves more sustainable. Then the other ones. Questions on urban citizenship I thought were really fascinating, just like various ways in which people, I thought I would get a pretty standard answer about rights and duties, but there was so much really interesting, moving ways in which people were thinking about how they express citizenship, how they felt like they belonged. The Waste Workers Collective had a really interesting, I asked them, so one of the questions we asked all the organizations was, so what is your home in the city? And so she was like, we don't work in that realm. We don't inhabit spaces. We go where there's space for us. We can't say that this is our space because the nature of our work is such. We don't inhabit spaces. And others were like, oh, the entire city of Delhi is our space. And what's another thing? Especially for the street theater groups and groups that perform in the streets outdoors and outdoor areas, public areas, they just talked about the shrinking of public space and how not only the shrinking in terms of the areas that were available for them, but also the fact that the city is so much noisier now that it's not easy to go someplace and do something. So it's the soundscape, but also access to public space, and how corporate groups or private theater companies had so much more access to space than public.
Yeah, a couple of themes that came up across these interviews that I don't know about surprised about. They came up more often than I thought. And one was a question of sustainability, ecological sustainability, financial sustainability, and it's another kind of one of those terms that's perhaps more overused than participation. So that's one I'm excited to go back to and really pull out where it comes up in every interview and how the groups are relating it to participation. There's one group that, a couple of groups have talked about continued participation in the neighborhoods they're working in as part of the sustainability of the group. Another question that came up, and the groups had a really big variance of opinions, was where they accept money from. So there were groups that were like, we don't care. If the Bank of Brazil wants to give us money and we're using it for a cause that we think is good, we'll take it. All the way to groups that refuse to take money that's not public. And they believe that you can only participate in the city as an activist if you're using public money. So I think that was a really interesting question to look at that came up, and there were very different answers. to where you get money from. If you do, there's a couple groups that did crowdsource fundraising on the internet. I think that was another really interesting theme.
I have a question sort of for all of you. I wonder if it would be possible to use your format to think about Chinese participatory art and cities and urban villages and the sort of stuff that Winnie's working on, but also like the fact that it means something different, participation, or like participatory art means something different when you have like a superstar like artist sort of employing a bunch of migrant workers to make something or to go to Germany as part of like a fairy tale. Like these sorts of examples are so economically defined that I'm wondering like how these, because what you're talking about just seems like such a dream compared to like the sites that I work in. I'm like, I don't know if like, it's sort of an open-ended question for any of you.
I think it's a question that gets addressed in some of the essays.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, there are examples of this sort of more idealistic, everyone coming together, but then there's also, you know, there's questions about how do you get, you know, youth who don't have political agency involved in a planning process.
Right.
And, you know, it's where is participation institutionalized? How is it co-opted in a neoliberal political process? So I think those kind of questions really come to the top in a lot of the essays. And I think, you know, I think in a couple of the interviews, the one with the architecture of gentrification, there's a long discussion about political funding and rights in the center of the city and how people are pushed out and kind of lose their right to participate in the city or to be in the center of the city. So I think those questions come up in the interviews also. I don't know if that answered.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, several of the academic essays do talk about the co-option of participation, or when participation really hasn't worked, and top-down participation, and artists that go into a community with this
Right.
art idea that just does not work or turns into something entirely different than they intended. So for instance, Khoj is this artist collective in New Delhi that I was working with, and really their journey with like community art or participatory art has been really, really interesting, because they set up in this working class neighborhood in Delhi called Khirki Extension, and they tried to, you know, go to the community and be like, let's paint this mural together, and people were not at all interested because it had nothing to do with them. And so they tried over several years, they tried various projects, and some were rejected, some were accepted, for these very reasons, that they were seen as irrelevant, top-down. The population itself was sort of transient, and people were coming in and going, and ownership of the project was always questioned. The artists were also just coming and going. There were international artists popping in for a week and doing this strange participatory art project that nobody really appreciated or wanted. So now 10 years later, they've come up with sort of 3 things that they've identified as relevant to that space after the 10 years of failed experiments in participatory art. And those 3 things are on urban farming. That's one of the things, because the women in the neighborhood said that they wanted to have kitchen gardens, just because of various reasons, rising food prices, whatever. But they said, can you help us get some land to make a kitchen garden? That's what we want to do. And the second thing was to identify spaces of play in this neighborhood for the children. So the children were, an architect and an artist went and did a sort of a fieldwork project with children in the neighborhood, asking them where and how they played and what they would want in terms of spaces of play. So they're trying to set up that something to do with spaces of play for the children based on all that research. And the third thing they're doing is, this is also a neighborhood that has a lot of immigrants from African countries, from Afghanistan and from Iran. And recently there were some racial tensions in this neighborhood. So they're trying to do something where they're calling it the India-Africa project. And ironically, the group code started with the mandate of bringing artists in the third world together, and now they're coming back to that mandate 10 years later, but much more concretely from a problem arising in the neighborhood, this problem of racial tension. And so they're bringing artists from Africa and from Delhi to work something else. So they're just starting up projects. So these are the three things that they're doing there. Non-limited answer.
We're actually at 2 o'clock now, so I want to say thank you very much for